Alright, so now we're going to move on to loops. Loops basically allow you to iterate or repeatedly run code, um, basically while a condition is true or for all elements in an iterable object. So we're going to start off with a for loop, and then after that we'll look at a while loop. Okay, so this first example here is going to be a for loop. Okay, so basically for loops are initiated with the keyword for, and they have 3 arguments. They don't always have to have 3 arguments, but you'll see this will start with one that does. Okay, so the first argument, so first is basically a code that is executed one time and before the execution of the loop. And then the second argument basically is the condition that determines when to stop the loop. And the last is and the third is code that is executed after each iteration. Okay, so generally, so in our first input here in the for loop is code that is executed one time and before the execution. Oops, did this get cut off? Well, anyway, of the loop, basically, right? So, what we're going to do is initiate a variable here. So, we're going to start off, we're just going to create a variable, call it let I. I is a common variable name used in for loops and loops in general. All right, so we will say, we'll start I off at 0. So we'll do I is equal to 0. So that's going to get ran before the for loop executes. Then the next is the condition. We'll do I is less than 10. So it'll execute as long as I is less than 10. And then the last argument is what we want to happen at the end of each loop. So what we want to do is increase the value of I sequentially up to 10, and at that point the loop will stop. So to do that, we are just going to do I plus plus. So we're basically going to increment I, right? Okay, and then what happens is going to get printed, or is going to be stated inside the curly brackets. So again, this is another use of curly brackets, just like an object or a function or flow control. So again, that's one of the reasons you see a lot of brackets in JavaScript. They're used in different cases. All right, so what we're going to do is we'll just print something to the console. So we'll do console.log, and we'll basically just do, I'm going to do this with the template literal. So we'll do the value is, and then we'll return back the value I, period. Okay. So let's run this and see what happens. Okay, there we go. So we get back the value is 1, the value is, value is 0, value is 1, value is 2, right? So it's going to continue to loop through this, and I is going to increase by 1 each time because of the increment there. And then every time, so this initiates at the beginning of the loop, so I starts off as 0, and then at the end of each loop, I is getting increased by 1 until it gets up to 10, and at that point the condition evaluates to false and the loop stops, right? Let's do one where it's like does it backwards. So let's change this to do I is equal to 10, and now we'll do I is, let's see, actually we'll do let's see, what was that? Yeah, let's do I is greater than 10, or I is 10, I is greater than 1, and then we'll now, instead of doing increment, we'll do the decrement. So we'll decrease it, right? So let's run that. So now it should print the other way. So 10, 9, 8, 7, down to 2, and then the value is 1, doesn't get executed because this condition is not met. All right, so that's an example of a simple for loop. So the key thing is to kind of understand what's going on in the declaration here. So again, this gets initiated before the loop starts. So we're basically initiating I with a value in this case, and then we do the condition. So the loop will run or iterate until the condition evaluates the false. And then we do the decrement, which is, in this case, or what happens at the end of each of the loops. So here we're just decreasing I by 1. All right, here's another example where we're going to combine both the flow control and also, the control flow and also a for loop. So I'm just going to dump this in because it's a lot to write. Okay. So here we're doing I is equal to 0, I is less than 15, and then I plus plus, so to increment. So it's going to start off as 0, it's going to get thrown through, so it'll print value is 10 if it's equal to 10, it'll print values less than 10 if less than 10, and values larger than 10 if larger than 10. So this will start off at 0, so we should get this 10 times, so 0 through 9, and then this once, and then this 5 times, and then the condition should evaluate the false, and then the loop should stop. So let's have a look at that. Oh, why did it not log every single one? Let me try this again. Oh, I'm sorry. It's doing this. It's showing us it's printed this 10 times, this once, and then this 4 times. Sorry, I said 5 before, but this is actually 11, 12, 13, 14. So there's only 4. Sorry. So this was right. It's just there's 10 repeats, no repeats, 4 repeats. Okay, so again, lots of brackets here. So one thing that's nice here in VS Code is if you highlight a bracket, it'll generally show you its pair. So this closes the for loop, that opens the for loop. This is this else statement, else if statement, if statement. So if you're trying to debug your code or you don't have a matching bracket or something, this highlighting can be useful for figuring out where you might have an issue. Okay, let's look at a situation where you don't have to specify the initial variable. Okay, so let's now iterate through every object in an array, right? So I'm going to create an array, so countries, and we have a list of countries there. And now I'm going to use basically a counter based on the array position. So we're going to initiate it at 0. Again, I could put this here if I wanted, but here I'm leaving it outside of the loop. So basically nothing gets executed right at the beginning of the loop. So this is, again, an example where you don't have to have this first argument. And then now I want to iterate not through each, so instead of using each country, I'm using its index, right? So I is less than length. So I get the length is this property for the array. So counties.length returns the length of the array, which should be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And then, sorry, I just realized it's kind of cut off. Move this over a little bit. There we go. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So this should be 0. So it's going to pull the county at index 0, Belgium. This will increment up, so then we'll have 1. So pull at index 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, and then it'll evaluate to false, and it'll stop the loop, right? So remember this, the indexing starts at 0. So the indexes in this case are 0 through 4 as opposed to 1 through 5. So that's why we do is less than length as opposed to is less than or equal to length or is less than length plus 1, right? So if I run this, we should get back then all those print statements. I would like to go to Belgium, I would like to go to Germany, Iceland, Hungary, and Scotland, right? So that's iterating through a loop. All right, let's look at one other example while we're in here. Okay, so this is like a slightly, the conditions here are a little bit different, but this is what I want to show. So let's start this off. I'm gonna add in let here. So this is an array 1 through 9. We're initiating the variable for the loop, the variable I. We're starting it at 0. Again, that could go here, but I'm doing it outside the loop. And then I'm getting the length of the array as I did in the last example. So that should be 10, right? All right, so basically I'm saying, while I is less than the length of the array, and then we're incrementing up. So now the if statement is a test. So we're basically doing a at index I. So the first one would be at index 0, which would be 1. So if percent 2, so that's modulus 2. So basically what that means is if the value is divisible by 2, then perfectly divisible by 2, then you'll get a remainder of 0, which means it's even. So then it'll print that that value is even. And then if this is not true, then it by default has to be odd, right? So this is going to print that back. All right, so let's run that. I don't really need to be highlighting this. I'm not sure why I'm doing that. All right, there we go. So 1 is odd, 2 is even, 3 is odd, 4 is even, 5 is odd, so on and so forth, and we stop at 9. Okay, so those are some examples of for loops that will allow you to iterate relative while a condition is true, and also iterating over an array. So in the next example, we'll take a look at a while loop.